Okay. Hi everybody, I think I was just introduced. I don't speak Russian, so I might repeat some of what was just said. My name is Дэвид Воллмар. I'm a teacher at StudyLab, where I've worked for the past 5 years or so, assisting students who apply to American and European boarding schools and universities. And today we're going to go through a presentation about some important information students should have when applying to ultra-selective universities in the United States. As you are well aware, it's not easy to be accepted to these universities, but we're going to talk about something that students can do to better their odds of being accepted. So, first things first, what are ultra-selective universities, or what are the universities? Surely everybody here is familiar with the universities on the list. We are going to define ultra-selective universities as those universities that have acceptance rates lower than 10%. So what this means, of the number of students that apply, in the case of Stanford, for example, only 5% of students are accepted. As you go down the list, you see the majority of these universities are Ivy League universities, so Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton, Brown, and Pennsylvania, and then you have a couple private universities as well. So needless to say, it's quite difficult to be accepted to an ultra-selective university. We're going to take a closer look at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at their 2017 admission statistics. So for the last academic year, they had over 20,000 applicants to the university. Only 1,400 were accepted with a yield of 7.2%. So needless to say, it's a very challenging university to get into. We're going to take an even closer look at how it broke down with American students or U.S. citizens versus international students. And what we see is that the percentage of international students accepted is actually quite lower. So in the case of MIT, the odds are against international students, unfortunately. However, if we sort of think about what we can do to better our chances, we might have an opportunity to be accepted. So why are these universities so selective in the first place? Well, the universities are nonprofits. Which means they operate a little bit differently than a company might. Nevertheless, they want to have the best students possible attending their university. If they have better students, they are more likely to achieve greater things in their studies and beyond. And then that confers advantages to the university, primarily having a better reputation. With a better reputation, the university is able to get more funding from the government, from private companies, etc. So there's a great deal of interest in these universities trying to get the best students that they possibly can. So what are they looking for? There's a couple different things the universities want to find in their students. The first thing is growth and potential. They want to know, does a student have the potential to sort of do something great in his or her career? And so they're going to measure this by looking at past achievement and past performance. And the way a student's going to demonstrate that is through his or her application. And so while they look at the application, they want to answer questions like, has this student reached his or her potential? Is this student self-motivated? Does he or she seek opportunities to better him or herself? They want to know what kind of contribution that student will be making, both at university and beyond. They look at the interests and activities of the student. What is the student doing in his or her free time, outside of school, outside of their studies? How are they using their free time? Are they curious? Do they have intellectually engaging activities that they participate in? And then beyond that, there's the arts, athletics, etc. Okay, they look for leaders and active individuals. They're also going to look at the character and the personality of the student. Of course, they want good people, not just students who are academically talented. They want students who are open-minded, who are leaders, who are creative. So they're going to look at the character and the personality of the student as well. And then finally, contributions to the university community. The university wants students who are going to make an impact at the university and give something back to the community. Okay, and so how does a university determine whether or not a student is capable of doing this? Well, they're going to look at the past achievement of the student. They're going to look at what the student did in high school. If that student made contributions to his campus at high school, or during high school, he or she is likely to be able to do the same at university. So in short, what sort of students are these universities looking for? They're looking for students who are going to accomplish big things in life. Students who are going to make a major impact, not only within their community at university, but beyond, once they graduate the university. Again, if they're able to do that, they're going to confer advantages for the university, which again is advantageous to the university. So at the bottom here, we have a quote from the Dean of Admissions at Harvard. We can see that they, out of about 40,000 applicants, they admit about 2,000. And he's basically saying that he wants a student who's going to make a difference in the world. Again, they want the best of the best, and they want students who are going to have an impact both in the university and beyond. How can a university determine whether or not a student is going to make that sort of impact? Well, they look at the application, right? So these are the primary elements of the application: a student's grades, standardized tests. For an international student, that's going to include TOEFL, in addition to SAT or ACT, and then SAT subject tests, or the SAT-2s. They look for students who have a challenging course load, so that would include advanced placement classes or honors classes, a student who's enrolled in the IB program, for example, recommendation letters, and then extracurriculars and application essays. And we're going to come back to those a little bit later in the presentation. So as we said earlier, the way that a university is going to be able to determine if a student can make the impact they want that student to have is to look at past achievement. Past performance predicts future performance. And so in terms of academic performance, the universities use GPA, grade point average, and SAT scores to make that determination. Again, looking at MIT here, we see that in terms of the math scores on the SAT, unless a student is scoring 700 or better, he or she doesn't really have much of a chance at acceptance. Similar for the reading and writing section of the SAT, a student really needs to be scoring over 700. But even so, as you can see, the admission rate for students who score between 750 and 800 on the SAT is still less than 15%, right? It's 10% in math and 13% in writing and reading. So what this means is that there are far more qualified applicants, at least in terms of test scores and GPA, than there are places at these ultra-selective universities. In other words, stellar grades and stellar test scores is not sufficient for admission to ultra-selective universities. Right? They are only a piece of the puzzle. So how then is a student able to distinguish him or herself from the others, to set him or herself apart from other equally qualified applicants? So going back to the extracurriculars, this part of the application, this is how a student is going to stand out. And the misconception a lot of students have when they apply to these ultra-selective universities is that the more they do, the better. And this is a misconception because well-roundedness is essentially mediocrity. These universities aren't looking for a student who does every possible activity at his or her high school, whether it's sport, music, art. They don't really look for a student who's doing multiple things in multiple different fields. What they want is someone who is focused in one or two areas, sort of specializations, and it's with that focus that that student is able to achieve within that field and demonstrate that he or she has the capacity for achievement and contribution at university and beyond. In the words of a Princeton admissions officer, they are interested in students who have they don't value one type of activity over another. They appreciate sustained commitment to the interest they have chosen to pursue. So in other words, they look for students who are focused and committed to their areas of expertise or their areas of specialization. So the idea here is to, as an applicant, to try to create what we're going to call a big spike in the application. So a big spike is something very impressive and difficult to do. Right? This is something that's going to set you apart from well-rounded students. And we see sort of the graphic here on the right side of the screen. The well-rounded student is someone who does a variety of different things, but doesn't really stand out in any of those activities or interests. Whereas the student with the big spike profile doesn't quite do as many activities, doesn't have as many interests, but is really a specialist or a standout applicant in one area. And that's really the key. Now, of course, to do that, you have to have sustained commitment, in the words of the Princeton's admissions office. You have to commit time and effort over the long term, throughout high school in order to create this type of profile that these universities are looking for. So we'll look at an example of a big spike. So we're going to call this student the science superstar. So this is a student who has straight A's in each of her high-level science courses, so biology, chemistry, physics, AP courses, right, or honors courses. However, in other courses, in the humanities subject, for example, literature and history, she's doing standard levels. And her grades may not be perfect. Maybe she has a B+ in history and an A- in literature. But overall, she's still going to have a strong GPA in the range of 3.7 on a 4.0 scale. So there's no need for the GPA to be perfect, but you do want to be sort of achieving straight A's in your area of interest. As for test scores, again, not perfect, but we see that this student would have high math score, given the fact that she's interested in the sciences, and a pretty good writing and reading score. 800s on the SAT-2s as well, because those are her areas of interests. Okay, but as we said, a lot of students have the grades in the test scores, and it's not sufficient for admission. So she's going to stand out through her extracurriculars, and we can see a range of activities that she's been involved in, from competing and achieving in science Olympiads to interning at a local lab. She attended a summer course at Cornell University where she did research. She spends several hours a week volunteering as a science tutor for younger students. She's the president of the science club at school, and this is a club that arranges meetings, guest lectures, field trips, etc. So this sort of profile is the profile of someone who has a big spike in science, right? And maybe she's on the field hockey team, and maybe she participated in one of the theatrical performances last year. But those are sort of extracurriculars that aren't really important to her application. And the university's not going to sort of give much weight to that. They're more interested in what area she's specializing in. The burgeoning writer. So similarly, this student has a big spike in the area of language, in literature and writing. So he's got perfect marks in his language-related subjects, such as literature, composition, Latin, but he's doing standard level courses in the sciences and math, okay? Nevertheless, he's achieved good marks in those courses, in part because they're easier. Again, his test scores are not perfect, but he's done very well on the writing and the reading section of the SAT, and very well on the SAT-2 in literature. Again, grades and test scores are not sufficient for acceptance to a top university, so he has distinguished himself through his extracurriculars. So for example, he's been published in publications for teen writers, he's participated in writing contests and won a couple of them, he has his own blog through which he comments on high school life, he's been involved in an internship at a publishing house in his city, he's also president of a writing club at school that helps students with their written assignments. So he's pretty accomplished in his field of interest. Again, both students have profiles of big spikes, right? The first one we looked at in science, this one in literature and language. So how can a student find his or her big spike? Because a lot of students don't necessarily know what they want to do. And it's important to note that whatever your spike is in, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the field that you're going to pursue at university. The idea is that you're going to create a big spike to demonstrate that you have the capacity for focus, effort, and achievement in one particular area, because if you're able to achieve great things in one area, that's evidence of your ability to achieve great things in another, should you choose to pursue that other area. So again, you don't need to necessarily specialize in the field that you hope to pursue at university. So how to find your big spike? The first thing you can do is sort of make a list of some of the things that you've done in recent years that made you really excited, happy, or proud. And then once you have that list, try to think about which of these areas you could then go sort of deeper into. What could you get more involved in? Think about how you could expand on those interests or those activities. And then from that list, narrow it down to the one that you think is sort of most appealing, the most interesting to you. Remember, whatever you choose to do is going to be something that you're going to commit hours upon hours to. So it should be something that you feel pretty strongly about. And then as you sort of embark on this mission to create a big spike, make sure that you're sort of taking small steps. And as you go through it, make sure that you're evaluating your progress. And make sure that it's something that you are enjoying. If you're not enjoying it, it's not going to be something you're going to want to do over several years that it's going to take to create the big spike. This is something students would ideally be doing in 9th or 10th class in a Russian school system. Basically, as soon as they start high school, ideally, because you need time to create the big spike, and it might so happen that you choose an area of interest and you commit some time to it, let's say 100 hours, and then after that time has been committed, you realize that it's not necessarily something you'd like to continue with, in which case you have to then find another area of interest. Okay, so in developing your big spike, there's some things that you need to avoid. Make sure that when you do your course selection, that you're not trying to take advanced level courses in every subject. This is going to create a workload that's going to eat up a lot of your free time. As we looked at the examples of the big spikes, they were sort of taking high-level courses in their fields of interest, in science and in literature, in the respective examples. So you don't need to take advanced level courses in every subject, just those that you're primarily interested in. Obviously, you need to avoid wasting time, things that a lot of high school students do, excessive use of social media, and then unfocused or distracted studying. You need to make sure that the time you're spending studying is time well spent. Because again, the key to developing a big spike is to have committed and focused extra or free time. And then pursuing unhelpful extracurriculars. These are extracurriculars that a lot of students do, and again, this is sort of in line with what a well-rounded student would do. So volunteering, athletics, playing instruments. That's not to say that if your interest in athletics is going to be your big spike. So for example, if you're an excellent tennis player and you have the opportunity to potentially play at university, you should pursue that. But if you're, again, going back to our example, like a science superstar, and then you're on the tennis team, the basketball team, and the field hockey team, you're probably not allowing yourself as much time as you need to really create your big spike in your area of interest, which would be science. So a further note on unhelpful extracurriculars. The extracurriculars that you're going to want to cut out are extracurriculars where you're not a leader, where you don't have the opportunity to sort of have an important role within that activity. You want to cut out extracurriculars that don't really require anything special to do. So for example, volunteering, right? If you're volunteering in something, that's something really anybody can do. There are exceptions. We saw the student who was volunteering as a science tutor because she's interested in science. That would be an exception to this. And you also want to eliminate extracurriculars where you've sort of maxed out your growth, where there's no room for development, when you've sort of plateaued. So these are the types of extracurriculars that you'd want to eliminate from your schedule so that you have time to pursue your big spike. So in closing, this is another quote from the Dean of Admissions at Harvard University. He's basically summing up a lot of what we talked about here, and that there are only 2,000 students who are accepted to Harvard, but these are students who pursued some activity to an unusual degree. They are among the best potential scholars, and they have outstanding achievements largely because of their strong personal qualities. How does a student demonstrate that he or she possesses these qualities? Through his or her big spike. So the SAT scores, the grades, okay, that's great, but then there has to be something else, something that sets the student apart, the big spike. Right? These students have made a commitment to pursue something they love, believe in, and value, and they do so with singular energy, discipline, and plain old hard work. Right? And so these are the keys to creating a big spike. This is how one separates or distinguishes him or herself from other qualified students. Okay, so with that we conclude the presentation. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.